and welcome to another video on the Monster Candle Trading channel. Today we're going to be reviewing the trading session for the New York time frame. That's going to be for the US Tech and the US500. For those in the US, you might be using the futures. So as per usual, the standard setup is going to be using the opening range gap to determine the bias for the day, and it can also determine other things such as whether there's going to be a lot of consolidation depending on news as well, given the size of the gap. Normally, if the gap is small, you can expect for the opening price from like 930 to 950 to be pretty much consolidation, so it's very useful there. But the primary focus for the opening range gap, which is the regular trading hours, which starts at 9:30 a.m. and close at 4:14 p.m. and for the electronic trading hours that run throughout the day, there is a gap between those specific time frames. So that's what we use to primarily focus here on the channel to get our trade setups. So as you can see on the chart, the 9:30 a.m. was marked out here, and below we had the 4:14 p.m. close, and the gap was lower, so I was anticipating a lower price for majority of the day. We had CPI today at 8:30 a.m., which meant that the market would be volatile, and there was a lot of movement to the upside, primarily just moving up for the entirety of the pre-session going into the starting of the range. I thought because of how large the opening range gap was that I could use the Monday's FEG for a trade entry, and thinking back on it right now, I believe that was an incorrect decision to make, mainly because it's CPI, and whenever we have these news days, it's always just best to wait and see what the market wants to do, and look for a trade setup at the 20 minutes macro, which is from 9:50 to 10:10, to see if the market wants to make its move there. So I entered the trade, as you can see, and it was working out in my favor for a little bit, but then eventually it ran against me and took me out of the trade. So from there, I was just waiting on 9:50 to come around so that way I can look for another entry in regards to sell. Here is another mistake that I made. I believe that this was the first FEG, so I was seeing if I could use it to take price lower as well, since the Monday's FEG wasn't necessarily closed above, but it wasn't the correct FEG. There is when I was actually marking out the first FEG of today, which is the first FEG that is printed after the 9:30 candle, and there it is on the US Tech. So moving forward after this, I was just simply waiting on the 9:50 time frame. 9:50, and when it rolled around, the market moved heavily away from the FEGs for both the US Tech and for the US500. So at this point, I knew that it was primarily just waiting. My idea was that since it was a let me get this out of the way. Since it was a news day, that there would be a retracement at 10:30. So that's where I was looking for a possible setup. And if you can see here, waiting for a possible setup, but nothing presented itself even at 10:30. So I waited on the 9:50 interval. And if you pay attention here, you realize that I was using the 2020 model here. So liquidity was being swept on the higher side, shift in market structure. This is the FEG. The idea is to use this FEG and place the stops above here to ensure that the entry wouldn't go away, but the market wasn't necessarily in like this huge hurry to move away. So I guess in hindsight, I should have just waited on the market to re-enter here, but I did a market entry which opened me up. I did a market entry on the US500, which opened me up, and it was for a breaker instead of just using the FEG, because I was worried that the trade would move away from me, which is not a really good mindset to go in. I should pretty much just have the sentiment that once the market retraces back up into the FEG, that's what I would use for the entry. So it's the fear of missing out that caused me to take the entries that you're seeing here, and I closed this trade early because I wanted, now that I was seeing that it was retracing back, so I closed the trade early on the US500 because I see that the market was retracing. So I wanted to get a better entry here on the US500 instead. And you see there, that's a huge stop loss. Um, that's a huge stop loss that I use there. It's not in line with what I would normally use. So huge mistake there on mine. If I waited, I could have gotten an entry in, and the stop loss would have only been 410. And the loss that's about to happen wouldn't be a big of a hit. So right here, right, the market stopped me out. So at this point, I'm looking at the chart and I'm saying, all right, cool. At the 10 macro, it failed to go lower after the shift in market structure. So instead of trying to pick the top of the market, I decided that since it failed to run lower on the 20 minutes macro, I'll use the inverted version. But since the FEG failed, since I didn't have enough in my account after that loss to take the trade on the US tech, I waited on the US 500 for the opportunity to play out. All right, there we go. And this from here is just pretty much just me waiting on the trade to actually play out. So I had it marked out as the inverted FEG, and of course in these types of days you just have to sit through a lot of the non-movements. Because once it starts to run, you'll know that it's ready to run, but you have to sit through a lot of the non-movements, right? Most of the time I was just checking to make sure how close I was to correcting the drawdown. So that way I can know when to leave out of the trade. Because again, whenever I make these huge mistakes on these days, the idea is not to hit a home run, but to recoup the losses that I made from the mistakes. If it's the case where it's just the market had won over me and it's not my personal mistakes, then I would be more willing to stay in the trade. But I just want to maintain a good frame of mind. So my main objective is to make sure that I'm recouping the losses that I've taken. So thanks again for tuning in. Really do appreciate you taking the time to watch my video. Like and subscribe if you want more. Thanks again for your time. Take care.